under threat, then that's when things start to turn, and they then put pressure on their MPs, and that's how it can change. So that's just like a local example.
Right.
So I think that's the dynamic that you'll see. They'll get annoyed with this tail wagging the dog.
Because there was something about the frog, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a highly endangered frog. It's about the size of your thumbnail.
Yeah.
Tiny little creature, and it's the most endangered frog in the world, and it's found where this mine is, or above where this mine will be, and so what's his face? Shane Jones sort of made fun of it, and we're not going to let a frog get in the way of our mining ambitions. Okay.
Right.
An endangered species, get that.
Yeah.
Get in the way of progress. Yeah.
That's the mindset.
That's the mindset. Why should we be concerned about endangered species disappearing from the perspective of someone who's been caring about the environment for so long?
Because we'll be next.
Don't drop the mic; it's expensive. Keep it there.
That's if you follow that to its logical conclusion, that's where we're heading with that.
Right. Is there a way, Dennis, from what you've seen and what you do, like, do you see progress in looking after the environment the way that people see progress and the way that the other people see looking after the environment? Is there a way to put these things together?
Yeah, that's often the sort of the philosophy of the Green Party is that the environment isn't a subset of the economy; it is the economy. So if you don't have a clean, viable environment, you don't have an economy. If you don't have fresh water and fresh air and unpolluted air and then climate change, I better move that out of the way. Otherwise,
the mushrooms, man, the mushrooms are calling you.
Yeah.
Do you want to hold them?
Yeah,
no?
sure. So
I'll hold them just here.
So that's the way you have to look at it. It's not the other way around. It's the environment comes first.
Scary times, Roy.
Yeah, very, very, to the fact that there's a lot of people in our community that don't even know this is happening. And when I had a bit of a kōrero the last couple of days, since we had a meeting at the Koatunu Hall, people are sitting here going, What do you mean fast track bill? What is that? And then I let them know what they're thinking, the three ministers, and they say, can they do that? They can't do that.
Yeah.
Is it legal? So it is a huge concern. Further on in the kōrero, I'm sure there's going to be some really interesting.
Let's go now. Let's go there now.
Let's go there now.
Sure.
Thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure
Dennis.
to be here.
Thank you. We usually let the conversation go, but it's so cool to have you here, and the urgency of the fast track requires action, from what I understand, or at least understanding, as Roy just said.
Sure.
So I would really appreciate if you could give us a bit of a history on that, and what does it mean?
Sure.
What is it? Can you do it? As Roimata said, can you do it?
Well, let's just deal with that for a start. I suppose the government can do anything if they can get a law through Parliament, but then a subsequent government can undo it. So that's what we have to cling on to, I think, is the fact that this law is probably going to pass because they have the numbers. It will be highly unpopular. There'll be massive a number of submissions opposing it, but I think they might tweak it here and there. But essentially, I think it will go through, unfortunately. And then they'll give fast track approval to a whole bunch of developments, like coal mining, like gold mining, like drilling for oil offshore, and a whole lot of stuff in the conservation estate, which is presently, not possible. But I've heard James Shaw say that, well, be careful if you act in an unconstitutional manner and ram this bill through without any public participation and involvement. And you don't then have a social licence, the public are not behind it, then don't be surprised if a subsequent government comes along and maybe acts a little unconstitutionally themselves and says, well, we're going to undo these consents. And if you're a mining company that's got a consent and you're sort of partway down the track with opening your mine and you've spent quite a bit of money on it, sorry, you're not going to have that licence anymore. It'll be taken away from you and you won't receive any compensation. And there's plenty of precedent for that happening. That can easily happen. That's so to answer your question, that's probably the best outcome that we can hope for.
It sounds like an excuse for big corruption time, though.
Well, there's a whole element of corruption the way it's structured, and what they call pork barrel politics, where a politician approves the consent for a project that helps his electorate or his party in some way, or they're the donor of campaign donations. So there is a concern around that, but I think there are much more fundamental concerns than that about this bill. And if we could just sort of touch on some of them.
Yes, please.
Yep.
Yeah. So the first thing is it's said to be a fast track bill, but in fact the submissions I've seen say, well, actually, no, it's not. What it is a mechanism to avoid having to take account of environmental concerns. So the whole way it's structured is to avoid having the sort of protections that we have under the Resource Management Act and other laws that protect the environment, and there's heaps of them. And so we already have a fast track bill. Labor brought it in under the COVID situation because there were some things that we needed to do urgently in that emergency. And the way that existing law, the old law under Labor, was structured is that there was a review panel, sure, for very limited types of fast track, but that review panel would make the decision itself. And so it heard all the evidence and then handed the decision back to the ministers who then had to enforce it. Under this new law, that's not the case. So the review panel is, for a start, it's made up of people who don't have any environmental qualifications. It's all developers and people who are used to, extractive industries and so on. And so it's all heavily favoured already. Projects can be referred to this review panel. They can't refuse it or turn it down. At best, they can suggest some conditions, and then it goes back to the minister, and the ministers make the final decision. So the whole element of public participation in these things is completely wiped out. So if you're an environmental group or you're 2 blocks away from where there's a major development and you're concerned about the impact on you, there's very limited opportunity for you to have a say now, if at all. And certainly if you're, a few kilometres away, you won't have any say.
Let's pick some of those topics and then we can go to other places as well. When it comes to mining, how much of the money or how much of the wealth that is extracted actually stays in the country?
Very little. There's a very, very small royalty the government charges on every ounce of gold that's taken, but it's peanuts. And so these are multinational overseas companies, the US or Australian or whatever. And so, at best the benefit is some jobs and some local spin-off from a mine, for example.
Which seems to be the cards that the industries would play, right? Oh, but we're providing jobs, we're creating a lifestyle for the people.
But if you said you'd been to Waihi. Right?
Oh, man,
So, okay, if you look at what they call the social deprivation index, it's an index of how poor people are, basically. And Waihi and Pairo and those surrounding towns have high deprivation index. They've had it for decades. So, there'll be some high-earning workers in that mine, but the community as a whole is not hugely benefiting from it.
Has suffered from it.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So I think that argument has a lot of flaws in it.
Right. What are the areas that are targeted for mining?
Well, on the Coromandel, it's gold. So it's actually not. Shane Jones talks about what does he call them? Rare earth minerals. Well, there ain't any on the Coromandel. They're after gold. That's it. Gold and silver.
And would it affect close to us here? Is it something
near?
Sure.
So let's take a bit of history, right? So we go back. I got involved in this issue in about 1980. Makes me think, oh God, I'm old. Anyway, and at that stage, if you can imagine every water catchment, like every river that flowed into a town from which that town or a little settlement or, just a few houses drew its water supply, every water catchment, almost exclusively on the Coromandel, had some sort of mining application or prospecting, well, mostly prospecting and exploration at that stage. So the whole peninsula was under siege from mining companies from all around the world, mostly Australia and the US. And they were doing so under an old law called the Mining Act. And basically that said, if you're a landowner, we don't need your consent. We can just go in and mine on your land. That's how draconian it was. And so all these little groups sprung up around the peninsula. So every little, like Colville or Kuatunu or Matarangi or whatever, all had their own little groups opposing mining. And the umbrella group for all of that was Coromandel Watchdog, which is still active to this day. And Coromandel Watchdog took over the sort of mantle of trying to help all these groups. And they were just being overwhelmed. So there were court cases, and a mining company would apply for a licence, and they'd get it because it was just hopelessly favoured. And so what the groups resorted to, because the law was so unfair, was direct action. So so the local community would go out and sit on a drilling rig, or that's right. And the police would arrive sort of 2 days later. In the meantime, the drilling rig had been stopped from working, and people would be arrested and so on. Or they'd block one-way bridges, up the western side of the peninsula.
Chain themselves to machinery.
The whole lot. And so there was all that going on. There was a huge media campaign, and there was also some legal action. I was involved as an environmental lawyer and a whole bunch of cases to try and stop them. And I was going to interminable watchdog meetings all around the peninsula every month, and it was clear to me that you're on a loser. We're never going to win that way. And I sort of put my legal brain to work and thought, well, we need some lateral thinking around this. And I thought, well, the only way we're going to stop it is to change the law. And at that stage, it was a national government with Jim Bolger as the Prime Minister, and they had a very, very narrow majority. So I took it to Watchdog and said, look, what we need is to get this rolling is what's called a private members bill. And a private members bill is that any member of Parliament can put a proposal to change the law, and it goes into a ballot. And every few weeks they have a ballot box and they pick one out, a bit like Lotto or something. And so I drafted this myself. And I approached Christine Fletcher, who was a national MP who had a place in Whitianga. I think she might have even a family or her husband owned a hotel here. And she was passionate about the Coromandel. And approached her and because she was in the National Party. And she said, look, I think it's probably best if this comes from a Labour MP in the opposition. So we then approached a Labour MP called Judith Tizard, and she took it on. And so she put the bill in the ballot, and we drew it out of the ballot within about 10 days. It was unheard
That's
of.
Right.
And as a result of that private members bill, I mean, we were just talking earlier about, pre-email and internet. So we literally had thousands of people write handwritten letters to their MP, and we gathered them all up and sent them. It was free postage to Wellington.
Wow.
And we just swamped them with letters saying we want this bill to pass. And it's not well known in the history of Parliament, but Christine Fletcher said told her colleagues that she would cross the floor, and that meant that the private member's bill would be passed. And of course National didn't want the embarrassment of Labour Party getting a win. So that in a way forced them to look at the law, and they then looked at it nationwide, and that became the amendment called the Crown Minerals Act. And within that law, there's sorry, this is a bit long-winded, but there was a schedule called Schedule 4, and what that said was a compromise that said all conservation land north of the Kopu-Hikawai Road and all the coastal areas would be off limits to mining. And at the time, that was the best we could do, and we sort of said, okay, it's a compromise. We really want the southern area run down past Roimata as well. And that was passed in 1997, I think. And it's been the law ever since. And so ever since, although companies have been active in the southern part, they really haven't even attempted to get onto conservation land north of the Kopu-Hikawai Road.
So just a partai here, just while we're talking about the mining and the fast track bill, if this bill gets passed,
yeah,
and from Kopu right to the tip of our peninsula here is safe at the moment.
Yeah.
If the bill gets passed, what does that look like?
Right. Good question. Very good question. And there's some, I'm sorry to not give you a firm answer, but there's some legal doubt around what is intended in this bill. And just before I left, I got an email back from Scott Simpson, the local MP. He said that he's spoken to the advisors of the bill, not the ministers, and said the intention is not to interfere with Schedule 4. Now, if that's the case, that's fantastic. But I think it's not that I don't trust what he said, it's just that it's come from advisors and they don't make the decision. The ministers make the decision. And so we need to hear, and unless we do hear by Friday when the submissions close, I'm advising people to submit on the basis that Schedule 4 is under risk.
Yep.
And then if it is at risk, and then if it the worst that we would say happens, we could have areas close here to us, like
you could have mining companies coming onto conservation land again, like they did back in the 80s. Yeah, for sure.
But then once they've entered into those areas, we as locals on the peninsula won't be able to stop them.
Not by law, but
Yep.
by direct action and activism.
Yep.
It might, it's always on the cards. That I think that inevitably would happen. And if you think about it politically, given that a lot of National Party voters live here and holiday here, and like what they have in terms of the environment and the forests they can walk in and the beaches they can walk on, and so on, you would think politically an astute National Party at least would say, no, we're not going to touch that. If they had any sense, they're not going to touch it. And that would be fantastic. I mean, that would be a really great outcome.
Do you fear for all the areas of the country, though? We have listeners from everywhere in
exactly.
Aotearoa. So
I mean, this is the problem. So we're focused on the Coromandel, but the West Coast is a different political environment of the South Island. They've got a lot of mining people down there who want to see it happen. And so there's a lot of environmentalists everywhere, Forest and Bird, and all these groups nationwide will fight tooth and nail to keep mining out of the conservation estate, and that's that's why there's so many submissions coming in.
We really go for understanding of situations. That's why we praise conversations, even with people that we not necessarily agree with.
Yeah, sure.
So I feel like I have that obligation of asking you, but like, is there any benefits in mining areas? Because in my mind, it's always like, oh, don't mine here, but I still want to use everything that mining brings to my life. And it feels like, oh, go mine my neighbor, go mine them.
Yeah, sure.
You know, so how do we deal with that cause?
Well, I suppose if you're in the centre of Australia, with no water issues, I mean, there's a dry, arid desert. The main issue with mining is the water pollution.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be possible to have a gold mine in central Australia. But the other issue is we already have so much gold that's already mined and sitting in vaults and jeweller shops and whatever. There's enough to recycle that to meet almost all of our needs. So we actually don't need to mine. It's all a financial. I don't know what the word is. It's a construct, so that the miners can make money. And they can certainly, as we said earlier, can extract all the wealth from here and take it overseas. And the problem is that they leave the issues behind. And what's least understood about mining, it's not about the hole in the ground. I mean, the Waihi open pit is an abomination, but right beside it is a thing called a tailings dam. And a tailings dam is all the waste that's taken out of that mine. It's crushed and exposed to air and oxygen, and there was a process to take the gold out, and the volume then is increased like 100 times. So it's like really tight in the hill, and when you open it up, its volume just increased massively, and that has to go somewhere because it's toxic. So it's actually the ground in which the gold is found has all these other nasties in it. And so they have to build these tailings dams, which are, several stories high. They contain, I think last time we were told it was 40 or 50 million tonnes in the Waihi mine. Well, that's all about to be expanded. And that stuff, that structure has to stay there in perpetuity. So if it ever were to, break in some way, an earthquake or heavy rain or whatever, and these things fail. They are designed by Western engineers all around the world. There's one in Brazil which broke. There was an earthquake, and it was like it was
a tidal wave.
Yeah, like it was 40 or 50 kilometres from the coast, and the tailings burst out of this thing and flowed all the way down out to sea, and polluted that whole river system.
Wow!
And not to mention wiped out the villages.
Yeah. So I mean, these things have to last forever, and we all know how earthquake prone New Zealand is.
Brazilians don't, because we don't have earthquakes there. So I wonder what that guy was up to.
Yeah, well, you had about a 2 or 3 megawatt earthquake, and that was enough to sort of set this thing off.
Yep.
So it's highly misunderstood, and in fact, even underground mining, you still have tailings, and I know there are modern methods now, but in Thames, where there was massive gold mining operation 140 years ago, they drilled these tunnels into the hill, and this nasty stuff was in there, and the streams and the water that flows out of those mines into the local streams is still running orange. So it's still leaching out iron oxide, which isn't particularly dangerous, but it wrecks the ecology of the river. But also there's a hotspot, off Thames of mercury and cadmium and all sorts of other heavy metals which, get into the food chain, and if you eat the fish then you can become ill, and, the whole ecosystem off Thames is pretty wrecked. So, these are effects that are continuing 150 years later. So that's sort of that's the legacy that they leave behind. So they have a very small bond. They do their thing for 10 or 20 years, maybe longer, and then they bugger off, and we're left with the legacy of it, which has to be protected in perpetuity. Okay. It's a great bargain for the mining companies.
Totally.
Yeah.
So just to make it clear, this korero that we're having isn't like we're not doing this for a scaremonger to our listeners. This is a real issue, and it's happening, and it has been happening for a very long time.
Yeah.
With this fast track bill, I keep going back to this fast track bill just so that we make sure that our listeners out there understand, that our whānau understand what could potentially be coming. If they do get it through and we don't get to have our say legally, what then? What do people then need to be doing if it goes through and we don't have our say?
Well, I suppose hopefully you'd think you'd hope that the younger generation, like they did in the 1980s, will
step up.
Because some of us are getting a bit past, getting arrested on drilling rigs.
Some aren't.
But so that whole community activism thing would have to come into play again. I think that's the only option. Of course, there's it could always be a swing away from this law. I mean, I think it's so obnoxious, and as people come to understand what it means, and it's not just about mining. Of course, it's it's coal mining, but it's all these other. It's so development orientated that it swings the balance entirely away from environmental protection, and that's frankly the whole point of it. That's why they're doing it. They don't want the sort of protections that are built into the existing system. And I want to touch on another area which is relevant to this for the Coromandel. So as part of this whole campaign, apart from the Schedule 4 I mentioned, there was because that's only conservation land. So there was a whole push to get what's called the district plan of the Thames-Coromandel Council to prohibit mining in certain areas away from the conservation estate. And myself and a town planner and some others, took the council on and said, look, your district plan isn't strong enough. And cut a long story short, it went through a whole bunch of courts, Environment Court, the High Court, got all the way to the Court of Appeal, which is the second from the top tier. And we got a judgment that said, this is how you decide whether an activity should be prohibited or not. And it gave us the sort of the foundation for it. And it went back then to the council. I mean, they got the mining companies in and they had this big mediation. And out of that, 15, 20 years ago, there are now what are called prohibited activities on the Coromandel. And so you've got mining prohibited in urban areas. So like Thames or Whitianga or, those town centres.
Yep, carry on.
And some industrial areas, some open space areas, and then there's areas defined around the coast in maps. So these are really special parts of our coast. And then there's a whole area around Moihau, the tip of the peninsula, which is completely off limits to mining. And these are all defined in the district plan, and they're what's called, as I said, prohibited activities. Now, this fast-track bill can simply override that. It can say, we don't care if it's a prohibited activity, we're going to go in there and approve us three ministers are going to approve a mine in the Coromandel in those areas. And that's absolutely outrageous. That's just overriding all that local sort of protections that have been built in around this community and supported by the local council.
So not only are they going to take the voice of the community, but they will also take the voice of tangata whenua for those areas.
Exactly.
Tangata whenua will not be able to stand up and say, no, you can't come in here.
I think the only exception to that is if there's it's involved in a treaty settlement. So there's, that would be, I think, the exception. But otherwise, it's all open slather.
Yep.
So I think that's a really important thing that people need to realise, just that all that work that's gone into saying these areas are off limits under our district plan, which is what our local council and community want, is completely at risk now.
Okay, it's all happening. People are watching us on YouTube, on Facebook. We got a bunch of comments, and I just want to tell the beautiful people who follow our show. If you agree with the fast track bill, this is a platform for you as well. Feel free to express your opinion. We want to listen to you. If you got something to share in a respectful way, we would love to listen to your thoughts, because obviously people in the country voted for some of those people. So don't feel ashamed. You shit. Joking. Emma Evangeline, we love you. She says, wanted to ask him, for those of us writing submissions against the bill, does Denis have any advice on key points to mention?
Yeah, excellent. So probably the easiest way is to use a template. And what's the name of that
so it is
website?
stopthefasttrackbill.com.
Yeah, stopthefasttrackbill.com. If you go to that website, there's a whole bunch of organisations, I think 4 or 5, which have produced a template, and you could choose the one that best suits, your views or the simplicity or whatever you want, and you can just put in your own thoughts around it. But it gives you a starting, it gets you going on it, because some people get a bit, I don't know, they find it a bit hard to get underway with it. And the other thing I'd urge you to do, even if you don't think you might do this, but actually say that you want to speak to it. Because you can make your submission, that's fine, but if you say you want to speak to it, you can do that over Zoom. So although the parliamentary committee is sitting in Wellington, they'll contact you, and you can get on your computer at home and you can speak to it. And even if you want to speak for 1 or 2 minutes, that's fine. And it just, the more people that's really powerful if you actually are speaking to it yourself.
Voice.
Yeah, so, there'll be thousands and thousands of written submissions, and whether they get read or not's another question. They should be, but whether they are or not. So, that's probably the best way. Yeah.
Thank you.
And they close on Friday. So you've got to get it
We've just got a picture there on the screen.
Great.
There you go.
Yeah,
Submissions close in 3 days, 4 hours, 19 minutes and 56 seconds.
So we get a lot of traction on the show on 2 days after the show. So today is the 16th. If you are listening to this on the 17th or on the 18th, you still have time, even on the 19th.
Yep.
You still have time to go stopthefasttrackbill.com. And if it's past the 19th, it is still relevant for you to understand what's going on and how this might affect you. Okay, so have a look at the website. We have our dear Mark watching us. Yo.
Mark T.
Mark
T.
Sarah H. And for other people I watch, thank you very much. Andrew Nicola, rich, looking after the rich to get richer. Mark says, picture one minister agreeing to allow a mine at Waiomo, even though it was refused due pollution worries. Tailings dams on the Thames coast, open cast mines in Kuatunu, all at the decision of one minister with no public or environmental or economic scrutiny. The government will be gone, but these mines will carry on for decades and their pollution forever. Picture a 50 million ton mine waste dump covering Obama Valley. And he would like follow up with him on the show. We had Mike before. Mike, we would love to bring you back, man. It was such a cool show. So we'll do that. Yes, there has been a bit interesting stuff left out, we haven't finished yet, about water pollution in areas threatened, which you covered. Mark commented this a few minutes ago. And these submissions should also be sent to national MPs, including Scott Simpson. So there you go. We got some cool
good advice
comments, good advice from the audience. Thank you very much for everyone who is watching. Denis, let's carry on and let's cover a few other points that are being affected or that are part of the fast track, please.
Well, I think the main thing I think I'd emphasise is it wipes out public participation.
Right.
So whereas before, you could be involved, to make a submission to your local council, and then if you wanted to appeal to the Environment Court, you could, and all that. All those rights of appeal go. The ability to appear even at the lowest level are severely limited.
Have you seen anything like that happening before in Aotearoa?
Good question, because back in actually 1979 there was the thing called the National Development Act, and we had there was a oil crisis, and we needed more electricity, and Muldoon was the Prime Minister, and the Clyde Dam in Central Otago was going through approval process, and it would flood a whole bunch of orchardists who had their apricot orchards alongside the river, and they were opposing and going through the process, and the government came in with this act and said, no, we don't care about that. We're going to just have the dam, and that was outrageous in those times even. And I've seen commentary that says this fast track bill is actually many times worse than that act back then, and how sweeping its powers are.
Thank you. One interesting thing that we can see quite often, to not say shocking, is that thing on the news. There's always something every day now. And so many of those topics affect Maori communities.
Sure.
This is something that I'm speaking as a foreigner who's been here for 11 years. And I don't care if people like or dislike the Labour government that was there before, but I would see much more positive aspects going towards Maori and Pacifica communities. And now in 100 days or so, I don't even know how many days, there's a lot going on. And the excuse is always that we're trying to unify New Zealand. We're trying to make Aotearoa New Zealand one, but then the Maori parties and the people who know what's best for their own communities are saying that that's not the case, which for me, it seems like that is not even an opposition talk. It's just a legit thing of saying this is not good for us, and why is it carrying it on then?
It's pure politics. They took the soundings on the Three Waters issue and sort of Maori taking over water and all that rubbish, and did some polling and asked these sort of cottage meetings and got the feedback that it was a winner for them electorally. So they cynically exploited that to gain power, frankly. And now look at the Three Waters issue. I mean, it's been foisted back on councils. Guess why your rates are going up? It's 12 to 13% here. It's 19% in Hamilton. It's the average is approaching 20% nationwide. Why is that? Oh well, because we don't have the ability to have Three Waters at scale like Labor had proposed. It's all been foisted back on local authorities, and they're now having to rate the ratepayers. So that whole divisive racial campaign is coming back to bite people in the pocket. Oh, what a shame. Yeah, there's a certain irony in it.
Yeah.
And then people are up in arms. Oh, why are my rates going up? Well, look in the mirror, mate. You're a lot of these people who would take that view are the very ones who were, rah for the stop Three Waters.
Right. Thank you. We also wanted to talk do you have anything else on that before we go to coastal hazards?
No.
Can we carry on? And if we have to, we come back. We got time. An interesting topic that you're passionate about and affects not only the Coromandel but other coastal areas are those hazards to our regions. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
It's a huge issue. I mean, some people are aware of it, but I think I'd say the majority of people are blithely unaware of just how serious it is, particularly on the Coromandel. But I mean, as you say, we've got 15,000 kilometres of coast, one of the biggest coastlines of any nation on earth.
15,000, wow.
Yeah. And there's 400 kilometres around the Coromandel for a start. So the District Council has done some quite good work on this. I mean, they got a bit of a prod from me and others about 4 years ago and said, you need to take coastal hazards seriously. And they formed this project called the Shoreline Management Project. And essentially they engaged some consultants from Holland and and they appointed some community panels. So there's one in Mercury Bay, there's one in Whangamata, Thames, Coromandel and so on. And they had about 8 or 10 people from the community. And they then sort of basically presented them with the science and said, well, what do you think is the best response to adapt to these hazards? And each of these panels came up with recommendations, and they have formed part of a shoreline management project. And they're now at the stage of prioritising those and saying, well, which are the most serious ones? And what they've come up with, and it's correct, and it's what got me involved in this issue way back, is that Thames is by far the most extreme risk. Thames and Tararoo, which is just north of Thames, and Te Puru, and Monatauri is part of Thames, which already has a little seawall. And that's correct. Thames has present day extreme risk from coastal flooding, not from erosion where the sand gets washed away from a beach, and that's an issue over here. But it's actual coastal flooding. This is when there's a combination of events sort of happen together. There's a strong wind coming from the northwest down the Firth. There's a low pressure which actually makes the sea rise up, because low pressure means less weight on the water and it rises. And then you've got maybe a king tide. If you get those things together, you can get what's called a storm surge. And we had one in 2018. And ironically, it was a year after I started saying, we need to watch out for a storm surge. These are 1 in 100 year events, and one happened the next.
Nostradamus.
Yeah. So, my credibility sort of rose a wee bit then, because people, what are you talking about? What are there? I've been here 50 years and all that. So they've taken it seriously, and they've identified Thames. And now in what's called the long-term plan, which is the thing they come out with to say, how are we going to spend our money for the next 10 years? It's flying under the radar probably here a bit, but they're sort of projecting that they'd have to spend somewhere in the region of $90 million in the next 10 years just for seawalls and protection for that little part of the Thames coast.
So when you're talking seawalls, you're not talking about the rock.
There's a variety of engineering methods they've recommended. One is a rip-wrap like you see out here on the foreshore. There's what they call T-walls, which are like just straight up and down concrete walls. And that's because they can't, there's buildings too close, they can't do the whole rip-wrap thing. So there's various options. But to give you an idea, in a paper leading up to them presenting this to the public, they estimated that if every ratepayer in the whole of the Thames-Coromandel district was required to pay for this, it would be $225 a year.
For how many years?
Well, for the I don't know, they didn't say, but I suppose it would be for the period of the loan to pay for it.
Wow.
So that sort of gives you an idea. What's more likely to happen is that, and this happens, say with the Regional Council, they have some experience in knowing this. If you're out on the Hauraki Plains near a farmer and you're protected by a stop bank, about 75% of having that stop bank there will be paid by the farmer or the people directly benefiting from it. So that's more likely to be what will happen. So that means that those people who are directly behind that wall in Thames will pay the bulk of the cost. Now, I'll give you an idea of what that means. So down in Hawke's Bay at a place called Hamoana, you may have seen there was an auction. A guy put up his property for auction for $1 because it was going to be wiped out by the sea. Well, that stretch of coast, there are 18 landowners, and they've been pushing, we want a seawall because our place is being wiped out. And the council said, okay, we'll cost up a seawall. It's $3 million, and if we take a loan over, I think it was 20 years, it's going to cost you $220,000 over the period of each property owner. So they said, well, what do you think about that? And some of them said, okay, I can save my property. And others didn't. So, they didn't have a consensus and they've dropped it. So that gives you an idea of sort of what we're talking about. So, I see in the Informer and, articles around here, why can't we have a seawall just, for the sailing club or the, there's a few properties down there that, we just, they just want a seawall. No one ever takes the next step and says, well, okay, and I'm prepared to pay for it and pay $220,000, thank you very much. And that's the problem. And so, and this is just magnified all around New Zealand, and it's magnified all around the Coromandel. Because Thames is the first cab off the rank, and guess who's next? It's Tairua, and then it's Whitianga, and like this, the local panel here came up with what's your protection option for Whitianga? Well, it's a seawall from Brophy's Beach all around the foreshore, past the CBD, past the entrance of the waterways, right back to where you come into town. Estimated cost 300 and something million.
How tall would that be?
5 metres. It's something like that.
So people are paying a lot of money to have a property by the beach, and there's going to be a wall in front of them.
Now, I have to say those costings are for a 1 in 100 year event in 100 years' time. And in Thames, we don't have 100 years to wait. And in Whitianga, it won't be 100 years either. But so these costs are coming at Thames people really, really quick. And there's another reason why that's even quicker. And that's because right on the foreshore of Thames is mangrove forest. So if you look at an old 1940s photo, basically just left of the State Highway where you go up Queen Street heading north, and you've got the railway station on your left. There's a little narrow strip beside the road, and beyond that was mangroves. Was. Mm-hmm. And in the from the 1970s on through the 1990s, it was quote unquote reclaimed. And now there's a retirement village. There's a big 3-story apartment block. There's the Pack and Save shopping centre, and then Monotari was reclaimed back in the 60s. All that is on soft sediment, and guess what? It's sinking.
Yeah.
And I've been saying, like a voice in the effing wilderness for 6 years or more, you need to measure the ground movement, not just at Monotari where a survey had been doing that work, but along the whole foreshore. And no one did it, and didn't actually build that information into the shoreline management project. So when these consultants from Holland came up with their designs for walls and their costings, they admit they did not take account of subsidence. And when I was on the Regional Council, I pushed to have this done. We sort of got part way down the track, and then it fell through the cracks. And I took a bit of a break when I was unelected, but I came back to it just recently, and I said, well, what happened to that subsidence measurement? Oh, we didn't do it. We got caught up in COVID and the floods and all that from Gabriel. So the bottom line is I got put it mildly pissed off with that. So I knew that there was a firm in England who had this satellite data, and so I approached them directly in the UK, and I didn't think they would sell the data for New Zealand. They surprised me, and they said yes, they would. Wow. So I did some haggling with them, and bottom line is I got for about $2,500 myself and another friend put the money in, and we bought this data. And guess what? It's between 8 and 12 millimetres a year, right along that narrow strip.
It's dropping.
It's dropping. Yeah.
Per year. Per
year. Now, millimetres doesn't sound like much, but sea level rise is about 4 millimetres a year at the moment. So we're tripling the rate of sea level rise on Thames. And the implication for that is that it means there's all these peer-reviewed scientific studies, and I'm a follower of the science. I don't buy this other bullshit. I've been here for 30 years and I haven't seen the sea rise. Well, okay, you can't actually see millimetres a year. So
unless you're lying down there all the time.
Yeah. So what that faster rate of what they call relative sea level rise means is that things are going to happen about 3 decades earlier. So if you just had sea level rise alone, it might be, like 3 decades away, maybe 2050. Now it's going to be 2030.
We had guests on the show, and like bright, intelligent people who say that is actually not happening, that the world's been changing, for millions and millions of years. What is where do they rely on? Like, what's the information that they use, or what's the logic that someone who denies that?
How about hundreds of thousands of climate scientists in every nation on Earth who, in their science, bodies, so expert climate scientists feeding into the IPCC, who then sort of number crunch all these documents, come up with a consensus which is accepted internationally. That's how.
Oh, but I mean, when someone goes against that, is it usually because they're protecting something for themselves, or just a different way of reading? Yeah,
I don't know. I fail to understand how people can.
Because sometimes they're quite loud.
Yeah, they are, but the good news is they're a very small minority. So if you take your public surveys, they may be 4% or something.
So it's not a problem to explain to those people what's going on. It's actually getting to local bodies, to governments, and
it's getting people to understand risk. And so I always come at this from my legal training, and I was acting for people buying property, right? And you can get what's called a LIM report. And that report will tell you what are the risks and hazards related to that property. And that report has to be accurate. And it has to be, the councils are obliged to provide accurate information. And then you present that information to people, and they say, oh, well, I don't care, I really like this property, I'm going to buy it anyway. Well, okay, that's your risk, you're taking it. But the obligation is to inform people. So when you have, these projects being developed based on, we're not going to take account of subsidence, then the whole project falls into question. It's actually not informing the public about the real urgency and imminency of these risks. And so that's where I start knocking on the door of the council and being a bit of a nuisance and saying, hang on, you can't give people, you can't massage the information to make it less scary. Your obligation is actually to tell people the whole story. And I know it's hard and it's not what people want to hear, but it's still what you have to do.
What role does media and local media play in the dissemination of that information?
Yeah, they do, but the media landscape's pretty gutted at the moment, isn't it? I mean,
what?
Well, apart from your excellent work,
apart from ALTBAYS,
yeah,
joking guys,
yeah. But I mean, it's pretty low key.
But is that an obligation when it comes to like the council using that, because or council would do that through their own media? How does that work? How do we access? How do we get to know?
Well, the legal obligation flows through into the LIM report. So if you get a LIM report now, I haven't checked lately, but it really should be disclosing, with flood maps and all the rest of it, just how severe the risk is. But if that's one thing to show a flood map, but then people want to know, well, how soon? When's this going to happen? And if the data they're using is not taking into account land subsidence, then they're not taking account how frequent and severe these storms are going to be. And just to give you an idea, the Parliamentary Commissioner produced a report in 2015 and it looked at various sea level rises. So just ignore subsidence, just take sea level rise. When it gets to a certain level, then these so-called 1 in 100 events become much more frequent. So I say just with sea level rise by 2050, off the top of my head, they'd be every year rather than every 100 years. And by the end of the century, they'd be happening every tide. So, so you get the scenario in Thames where it's much more extreme and much more quick. Then these extreme events are going to happen really, really frequently.
And so I'm not a scientist and I'm not a geo guy either, whatever that means. But I could imagine that once a part of a town or village that is in an area like Thames,
Yeah.
once that stabilised whenua on the outskirts of their little village or their city becomes sodden, the process of that subsidence would happen, it makes sense, would happen so much sooner, and then the rest of the town would follow. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
so you got the sea level rising and the land dropping. So you've got to add those two. You've got to add those two things together, and that's accepted science. So yeah.
I go back to Emma's question before, and for us as community, as the everyday people that are trying to live and still make a change for our children, what would you recommend?
And get informed about the risk, and then make your own judgment. And that really is an obligation on the council to do that. And that's part of my campaign, if you like, at the moment, to make sure that the council has been honest with the public. I'm not saying they're being dishonest, but I'm just saying, this satellite data has sort of shocked them a bit, and we need a comprehensive satellite study done, just to know how quickly it's happening on the foreshore, because Thames is unusual. The further back you go towards the hills, it's actually rising, which is a good thing. So the immediate coastal margin is at risk, but maybe further back isn't. And then there's another whole issue which again flies under the radar, and that is you can have a wall. So this is your wall, right? And you've got the sediment underneath it. But what about groundwater? So you've got the land behind it here. So if the sea rises, it puts extra water pressure on the area around the wall and can force up the groundwater on the landward side. So you can have a scenario where you get flooded in behind the wall, and it comes up into your subsurface and even into the surface before it actually overtops it with a storm surge. Yep. And Thames is on, the sediment, it's leaky. It's been confirmed by an engineering firm. It's a leaky aquifer. And then, so what's the solution? Well, the solution might be to put what's called sheet piling down. So you actually, have these huge sheets that are joined together, and they bang down into the sediment. And some of the costings that the Dutch firm have done, they've said to go down 12 metres, and 12 metres deep, and each metre you go along is $5,500. Right, so that's their costing. So, okay, they've only costed 20% of the length of the wall to have sheet piling. And why is that? It's all the same geology. Mm-hmm. So again, these figures that the council will put out are pretty suspect. So what if you have to go to 24 metres or you have to go to 36 metres? The costs just balloon out. And I've done a bit of maths, and I put a submission in. You're talking maybe $200 or $300 million extra on top of what it's already cost.
Wow.
So there's this is really serious stuff, and I see people in the local paper here worrying about $4 million for some social development stuff under the long-term plan, and over there, it's $100 million. And guess what? That $100 million is only 40% of the cost, because the way the council's assumptions relating to it is that the government is going to stump up with 60%. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
In this environment, they've just put 3 waters back on council. Oh no, we're not paying for that. That's you. You put it through your rates. So are we realistically going to get 60% from central government? And so we're already talking about $100 million in the next 10 years, and then another $200 or $300 million. That's just for Thames.
And sorry, Dennis, where is the payment coming from for that?
Yeah. Well, as I said earlier, the way it's structured at the moment, if you put aside central government funding, magically appearing, it's coming from the ratepayer.
Yeah.
And it's coming almost certainly from the ratepayers who directly benefit behind that wall.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
I gave you the example down in the Hawke's Bay of just how much that might cost.
Yeah.
So, this is why I'm so passionate about this subject, because we really need to think about this and following from that, is the seawall now the best option?
Mm.
And if it's not the best option, what is? And to its credit, the council has, in the Thames area, started what's called a spatial plan, and that's looking at
Take people to space.
Yeah, spatial. Yeah.
Run to
The hills.
Elon,
Iron Maiden fan?
Elon Musk on steroids. Yeah. But no, it's SPATIAL. So basically, they're looking at some land, on the road to Fururi, south
Right.
of Thames. It's elevated land, and that might be it looks like quite good sort of property. It's elevated and a good place to think about a new development for Thames. So I think the priority has to be really to put the effort into that, because I think it's almost inevitable people are going to have to retreat from Thames.
Okay,
at least
so-
part of
Yep.
Thames.
Oh,
So
damn.
if for some unknown reason there's we leap into the future in 20 years and Thames has subsided even faster than what the scientists have said, it makes sense for them to just pick up and move to the hills.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that takes a lot of planning and a lot. Not forward. You might need a decade to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you need to start thinking about it now.
Who would pay for that?
Well, again, that's
Who are you gonna call?
in an ironic way, it might, and there's a very big might. It might be more likely that the government would pay for that, and that's actually been actively considered in Wellington.
Okay. Yep.
So there's lots of studies been done about, who would qualify for managed retreat and how it would be paid for, and there's all sorts of options being floated around. I'll just give you a couple of thought pieces here.
Mm.
So this is relevant to people, in particularly this town. Would you compensate people for whom it's a holiday home?
Wow.
Okay, or if it's only your first home, the home that you occupy. So if there was to be a compensation scheme, would holiday home owners miss out? What if the argument is, you should have known about climate change. It's been in the news for 30 years. Why did you buy on the coast, for God's sake? Should we compensate you? Probably they are going to, because it's politically, so issues like that. Should we put a cap on it? So all those things are being actively talked about. And it's been suggested that this should be a bipartisan approach. We don't want, one government saying yes, they're going to compensate people, and another coming in and saying they're not. It's just hopeless.
Mm.
Dennis, we got a few things to talk about,
Yeah, sure.
but our time is short. So I just had a look at the list, and because we've been talking so much about water,
Yeah.
I feel like we should stay on that track, because another topic that you seem interested and passionate about, it's water contamination, and I would like to invite you to carry on this chat. We're going to find a way to put Coromandel, which is much more local, which is much more Coromandel focused, but I feel like the water situation, because you mentioned the dairy industry and those issues, they are a bit more like Aotearoa wide. So if it's okay for you guys, then we
Absolutely.
go there a bit
that's
more.
good. Yeah, so it's just, having been on the regional council, you realise just how dire the water quality situation is, and particularly not so much in the Coromandel. We're quite lucky. I mean, I still swim in the Taimana River in the summer. It's just fantastic. It's amazing. But out on the Hauraki Plains, it's a whole different story, and that's true of anywhere where the rivers are downstream of the dairy sector, and the dairy industry is frankly, is the main contributor to water pollution. We have to face that reality, and I'm not saying the farmers are all nasty people. They're not, and so it's not to blame them on an individual level, and they've been very poorly served by their leadership. They've gone into fighting environmental controls, and they're responsible for this whole rollback with the fast track. You know, they're behind that whole push as well. So we have to face the reality. The irony is that it's nitrates in the water which are the main problem, especially for humans. And there's emerging science that's saying there's much higher levels of colon cancer and preterm births from high nitrate levels, far above the limits that we currently set in our regulatory settings. And Greenpeace and others have been taking it on themselves because, frankly, the regional councils do a shit job of this, a cow shit job of it, of actually informing people just how safe their water is. So they've gone out into the communities and they've got these water testing kits. People can come to them in a town hall, they bring their water and they get it tested, and they can actually find out how bad it is. And particularly in Canterbury, it's dire, because they've allowed the dairy industry with irrigation to have dairy farms on stony ground, and it just
washes off.
The nitrates just leach into the ground, and it ends up in the rivers really quickly. But it's still bad on the Waikato, and we've got, the Waihau and the Piako are wrecked environmentally. You've got lakes, the inland lakes of the Waikato are just grossly polluted. They're just dead, and they're surrounded by dairy farms. So it's a really sad situation, and the dairy industry as a whole and the leadership just don't face up to it. And what I observed on the regional council was, while the staff are aware of this and they're very great scientists and they know what's going on, at a political level they get captured by dairy farmers. So there was one guy in there, I won't name him, but he was just completely blatant about it. I'm here to protect the dairy farmer. I don't care. I don't give a shit about the Coromandel. I'm not here for the Coromandel. I don't care about that. I'm here to look after the dairy farmers and make sure they don't get regulated. And that, they just dominate the scene. You had multiple numbers of councillors who are from that industry. And it's the same nationwide. So it's a stuffed system. We need a new system. That's in a nutshell where I've come from.
That's where I was going. Like, we need a new system, and I like how you started, because when people talk about that, it feels like it's an attack.
It's not
to dairy farmers, and I guess we all know how important it is for the country, how much of our economy relies on dairy farming, but. Going from another perspective, it's do you feel like it's losing strength, especially with the fermentation?
Precision fermentation.
Is it something that it is actually happening? Because I saw that 2 years ago, and then you brought it up, and because I don't consume, I'm interested on the industry to see where it's going. And I've heard that a long time ago, but I don't know. Is it evolving?
The phrase is precision fermentation, and basically it's the concept that you can make any sort of protein, but certainly dairy protein in a vat.
Yeah.
And you use microbes, and you can actually get absolutely 100% identical protein. You wouldn't be able to distinguish it from the protein that comes out of a cow.
If not more nutritious.
Well, it's probably just as nutritious, but the thing is, it doesn't have, you're not killing bobby calves and the animal welfare issues. You're not polluting the climate with methane, and you're not polluting the rivers, and you're not taking up vast swathes of farmland which we need back in forest to capture carbon and so on. So on any level you want to choose, it's hugely beneficial to the planet, and it's a huge threat to the New Zealand dairy industry, because we have this image in our mind that, we sell milk. We don't. We don't sell milk. We sell dairy powder. We sell food ingredients. 70% of our exports is packaged up in big bags, and that's what we sell. And it goes into other products that other companies overseas make. So if you're someone in, I don't know, Finland or Germany, and you go to England, you go into a supermarket, and you're buying a product that's got these fillers in, you don't have a clue whether there's New Zealand milk in it. You wouldn't have a clue, and you don't care. And so if that product is then is then made by precision fermentation in a vat in England rather than exported from New Zealand.
It's cheaper to make.
It's cheaper to make, it's less environmentally damaging, and you don't tell the difference, and it tastes the same, and it's made locally. You're just going to buy that product, and you're not going to buy the New Zealand one. So, I mean, there's been some studies done. What got me interested is a guy called Tony Sieber, who's a futurist, and he's written a report on this probably about 5 years ago now. And he has an amazing ability to foretell the future. I mean, like 2014, he estimated what the price of EV batteries would be today, and he's right on the money. And that EVs would, be taking off now, which they are. So, he's predicted that it'll be dairy protein will be the first protein that will be at threat from this whole process. And eventually it'll be meat and fish and almost any type of food. And it could revolutionise the way that we eat.
So I got a bit lost there.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I'm happy to...
Well, the only thing I got lost with is what is it made from?
It's basically... It's microbes sort of multiply and
so that's the only part that actually comes from the animal, right? You actually extract it from the animal. Is that right from my understanding now?
I'm not sure. But it's basically a microbial process, and it produces identical anyway. Any way you looked at it, the way it's made up, it's identical to...
Similar to cloning?
I suppose so. I'm not sure the exact science around that.
I'm just trying to get my head around,
the
beef and
meat's going to be a whole lot more difficult because it's got all those juices that come out and the flavour and the taste.
Yeah.
But actually, what Sieber and others are saying is that dairy protein, like of everything that a cow produces in its milk, only 3% of that is protein, and that's the bit that you really want in your product. Yep. So only 3% is actual protein. The rest is pretty much water.
And fat.
Yeah.
Yay.
And then there's all those health issues with dairy, of course, as well.
Have you gone that far to see? Because that's the thing. Smart countries and industries, they reinvent themselves.
Sure.
Is it something doable?
This is what worries me, is that the dairy leadership, they know about this, of course they do, but you don't see any sign that they're innovating enough to counter this threat, and it could be coming at us, by 2030. And the other problem for the dairy industry is that they're highly indebted to the banks, so that dairy farmers carry a huge amount of debt, and it may only take, like a 10 or 20% drop in their profits and the, overseas sales, and they could tip over. So, that's huge for our economy. And so, I just fail to understand why we're not, getting into this and trying to look at other alternatives.
And it's actually really, really sad when you hear stories about farmers, when they get into a situation, there's only one way for them to get out, and it's pretty hard. It's a pretty hard industry to be in. Yeah, and
they'd have to think about getting into alternatives. I mean, there's the other big sort of threat to them, I suppose, is plant-based products like oat milk. I mean, I'm drinking oat milk now, in my coffee. And so, there are some things they can move into.
It's interesting because, as I said, I like to follow that industry, and a lot of the times you see people saying how dairy consumption is growing in a way that is trying to put down the other ones. But when you see real data, it's not that the alternative milks are less strong. They're actually growing. But what's happening is the dairy industry, it's smart enough to tap into countries that never had the culture of consuming dairy.
Yeah, well, the Chinese were.
But at the same time, health conditions start to become a problem in those countries. And then the governments are kind of like, whoa, now we consume dairy, but now we're having these health issues. Yeah. So as I said, when I say smart countries, I'm not calling the other one dumb, but like when it starts to deal with the health of the population, that's when you require action.
Yeah, and guess who's going to be at the forefront of precision fermentation? China. They're already, they have their 5-year plans, and they've already identified that alternative food is one thing they're going to focus on. And they've shown the way with EVs. They realised well before anyone else, and they're now creaming it on the world market with EV sales. They're dominating.
I want to talk about that. Just before we go there, Taylor sent me just a little thing that might help here, Roimata. Lab milk is made through a process of extracting the casein. Casein, is that how you guys say it? C-A-S?
Casein.
Casein. And whey proteins from dairy milk. So I'm going to read it again. Lab milk is made through a process of extracting the casein and whey proteins from dairy milk and inserting them into a specific type of yeast, which can then replicate the cells in plant form. This yeast is fermented with sugar, then made into a powder, which is then mixed with water, hopefully clean. I added that, and fortified with vitamins.
Yeah. So basically, if you think about how you brew beer, it's much the same process.
Good example. Everyone pays attention now. Everyone's like, "What? Oh, finally they're talking about beer."
And guess what? You can brew beer anywhere where you've got the yeast. So, the fact that we see ourselves as having this competitive advantage because we're pasture fed and, green, and it's all bullshit. But anyway, it's going to go out the window because you can have a yeast vat anywhere pretty much.
Thank you very much. Now, the EV, I think it will probably be one of the last topics, unfortunately, because we're running out of time, but we'll talk about the continuation for this. EVs. I saw recently that the government was actually pretty proud of how it's declining the sales, obviously, because I think there was some changes in those supports. Why do people fear so much? Is it because of the oil industry and the tails attached?
It's all driven by the fossil fuel industry. I mean that EV subsidy scheme was the most successful environmental and climate policy we've ever had, and the government's ditched it. It's just ridiculous. And they also put up what they call the RUC, the fees you pay for road users. There's arguments both ways on that one, but I mean, in spite of that, EVs are going to dominate the market in New Zealand and worldwide anyway. So even without subsidies, people can't see that. But then they never saw it with one of these. So when these first came out, they're a fad,
Cell phones, folks, listeners.
They're on what's called an exponential S curve. So they start off really slow and they get to about 5%, and then they take off, and they just go straight up in a straight line. And that happened with the microwave oven and the internet and the smartphone, and it's happening with EVs. And the price of an EV battery has already dropped about 90%, and there's still a long way to go. The major manufacturer in China, CATL, has just announced a new battery that's going to be 50% cheaper just this year alone, and that's the major cost in an EV. So people are saying, EVs are slowing down. It's rubbish. These things are just going to take control of the whole market, and people might hang on to their petrol cars or whatever for a while, but and I'd say in 5 years, most people won't go near them. And the reason will be because they'll be cheaper, and they're cheaper to own and cheaper to run, and also they're much cleaner. I mean, we spend about $15 billion a year on the health costs of the pollution coming out of the tailpipe of diesel and petrol cars in New Zealand. It causes 300 premature deaths a year and thousands of hospitalisations with asthma and all these other respiratory.
Did you just say 15 billion?
15 billion, yes, in health costs.
And we're talking about a small country that is proud to be green. We're not even talking about
people
big
get hang up. They're too heavy, and they make the roads. There's no range. I own an EV. It has 420 k's. I've been to a fast charger once in the last year. I charge up at home overnight. I can go to Auckland, Tauranga, Whitianga and back, and still have 120 k's on the clock.
Wow.
You know, it's just not a problem. It's just not a problem. And the other thing I want to touch on, which is connected to it, which is a real passion of mine, is that what's coming is and people think that I'm crazy, but is what they call robo-taxis or autonomous vehicles. And Tesla already has software in its cars in the US where you can, buy this, get a subscription to this. And people are putting up YouTube videos and they're driving 1.5 to 2 hours through the streets of San Francisco, through construction zones, which are all altered, roads and whatever, motorways, roads with no road markings and cars parked for 1.5 hours without touching the steering wheel.
Oh, that's my dream. Can't wait.
This software is still being rolled out and developed. But already it's safer than a human driver because guess what? An autonomous driver doesn't get drunk, it doesn't look at its phone, it doesn't get tired, it doesn't have argument with the kids in the back,
I was just going to say it doesn't talk back.
Yeah, it doesn't talk back. And so it might sound crazy, but when they get maybe at least 10 times or maybe 50 times safer than a human driver, then cities all around the world are going to want them. Because they're going to save them heaps in traffic accidents and all the rest of it.
Well, I thought Logan's Run was pretty crazy,
So it seems futuristic, but we're on the cusp, and whether it's 1 year or 3 years or something, these things are coming, and then they transform cities. Like 30% of our space in cities is taken up with parking.
Yep.
And you got parking on the street, parking buildings. You won't need hardly any of that because these cars will just be circulating, and not so much in Thames and Whitianga initially, of course, but in the cities. I want a ute. Okay, well, dial up a ute. If I want a people mover, dial up a people mover. You want just a nice sports car, or you just choose what you want.
Yeah. So you're talking. You can ring up and go.
Well, you go
like
on
a
your
Uber,
Yeah, Uber. But
and then it'll just pull up and you hop on it and
it'll
takes
take you where you want. Yeah. And so if you're an elderly person, like I've seen this a lot with people lose their license, and it's just game changing. Well, not a problem. You just call up a car, and so car ownership will be a thing of the past for a lot of people.
Incredible.
Some people will hang on to their cars, but a lot of people just
become a trophy in the backyard of.
Yeah, people hang on to their, their what do you call it? The Whangamata event, I can't think of the name of it.
Yeah.
The beach hop?
Yeah, the beach hop.
Hop.
People will hang on to those sort of cars. But for a lot of people, especially in the cities, they won't own a car. And they'll be incredibly cheap. So the cost of getting around will be so much cheaper. They'll still cause congestion, of course, which is still an issue.
I would order a Harley.
Ooh,
I hope they have. I hope they design a Harley.
Autonomous Harleys.
I think the marketing for that will be the best and easiest ever, which will be drink and drive.
So
people will be like, sign me in. I'm in. I'm up.
Yeah.
Bring me a Chardonnay.
So they've estimated in the US the average commute for people is about 40 minutes. So that's 40 minutes you get back to sit in the car and do what you want to do. And, several 20 days a year you lose commuting, which is you could devote to something else. You could watch a movie or
stay with the kids.
Yeah.
Or not.
So all these things are coming so much sooner than people imagine.
Right.
Now, if people want to check it out, you go on YouTube and put in FSD Tesla. FSD stands for full self-driving, which actually it isn't yet, but anyway, that's what they call it. And you can see these amazing videos of people, just sitting there. They're not. You still have to have your hands near the wheel at this stage, so you can take over. If there's a problem. But people are driving 1.5 hours in multiple scenarios and not touching the wheel.
And they do have. I have seen trucks on motorways that are. What did you call it?
FSD.
Autonomous.
Autonomous. Yeah.
And You know, they have videos where these trucks are driving down the highway. There's no driver, but they're taking their load to where they need to go.
There might be some limited use of that. I mean, there's another firm called Waymo, which, you know, has, you know, like infrastructure all through the city so that it can navigate its way, but Tesla can go anywhere.
Wow.
There you go.
Thank God you finished with on a positive.
Yeah, exactly.
Drink and drive.
Drink and drive, folks. There you go. Yeah. Dennis, this is cool, man. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome.
It's important for us to stay on the educational side of things and again positive, because there's so much shit going on. You watch the TV and for me sometimes it's like, oh my God, is it like because bad news sell more and then you keep feeding people with horrible things, but they affect our daily lives. So I'm glad you bringing that up. Thanks for Roimata for bringing your notes and for talking politics, the topic that you don't.
First time.
Good times.
Thank you, boys. It's been awesome.
Thank you. Can you pass me the beautiful bunny over there, Coromandel? Cool. So there you go, folks. Some good stuff. Local media from the Coromandel.nz. If you find this beautiful gem on your favorite cafe, make sure to flick it through for some. Oh, look at this. Francie Lidgard, top singer from our region. We got proud to be local, our dear friend Ron Morgan, ex-Magri Bay Area School teacher, always finds some ex-students and talk about where they are in the world. Brought to you by CFM. We got the games page because, you know, Kiwis love the games page thing. And we are always supporting local artists. So if you like what you see, make sure to hit us up. You can collab with us. hello@coromandel.nz if you would like to see your stories or your poems here in the magazine. I want to send a big shout out to our friend Amir Yusuf, who wrote a beautiful short story that it was published this month, and there's another one coming up. We stayed with him in Waihi, and the bro was like a legend in Malaysia, a top musician, famous as, and now he lives in the beautiful Coromandel in Waihi. Cool collaborations coming out of this, so make sure to support the team, Coromandel.nz. We go live every Tuesday and Thursday. There will be some exceptions. We're going to be changing a few days because we are moving into a new studio in a few days. As you know, last time we did that, and now we got hold of it. Hey, Taylor, I think we know what to do. So it's going to be a bit quicker. We're not going to stop the show. That's the plan. We might stop for maybe like a week, but the plan is to keep you guys updated and show you the process of how we're going to build the new studio so we can keep creating content and stay close to you guys. And there's some cool guests as usual coming at the end of this month. So stay with us. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Mr. Roy. Thanks for the team at the back. Kia ora. Yo. Thanks, Taylor. I'll see you guys next week. Ka kite. Peace.